Happy Place Home Studios Basic Recording Series. This is part 5, in which we'll cover recording your guitars and bass guitars through amplification and effects. What do I mean by that? Well, we covered in part 4 recording your acoustic and electric guitars dry directly into your audio system. In other words, with no pedals or other devices between your guitar and your audio interface. Now we're going to put a couple of things between our guitars and bass guitars and show you how that process works to get those amplified signals with effects directly into your audio system and then into your digital audio workstation. There are many devices that you can put between your guitar, your bass guitar, and your audio input. And they range from the very, very simple to the really sophisticated, complex, and very high tech. On the really simple side might just be your favorite stomp box that adds reverb or another straightforward effect, or a couple of stomp boxes that you put together and you put those between your guitar and your audio system. Or you might have a stomp box emulator or farm like HX Stomp from Line 6 that allows you to have a lot of stomp boxes chained together and available to you. Or you might have something even more sophisticated, such as a full guitar processor unit like the Line 6 Helix or the Neural system that's out there, or there's one from Kemper. There are many of these guitar processors, and there will be many, many more in the future. And not only do they exist as physical devices that you could hook up between your guitar and your audio input, but you can even add them on through a plug-in after you've recorded your guitar. So what does a guitar processor do? Well, I'm going to be doing this with my Line 6 Helix for this video. I've used it many times before, and it is a truly amazing device. Not only does it allow you to add simple and complex effects and emulate many, many stomp boxes that are famous throughout the history of guitar stomp boxes, but it also models amplifiers and even allows you to use what they call impulse responses to not only have an amplifier being modeled or preamp, but also a cabinet and mic placement on the cabinet. It's really amazing technology. So what do I mean by modeling amplifiers? Well, Line 6 has literally gone back through the historical catalog of popular amplifiers from companies like Fender and Marshall, and they have created very precise emulations of them that you can select and use in your guitar playing and your guitar recording. Now, they don't call these emulations the same thing. They have names for them that hint at what they're emulating, but for copyright reasons, they don't call them the same thing. But you can easily cross-reference their name to the actual amplifiers. So with this, you can create what Helix calls presets, and just using stomp functionality, go back and forth between different presets and have an entire historical catalog of the amplifiers, cabinets, and effects that you want to record. Very amazing stuff. A device like the Helix has a tremendous capability for accepting input and creating output. You can input the guitar directly. You can input line level signals from anything that produces a line level signal, such as a mixing board. You can output via MIDI, via USB. And of course, what we'll be using is our XLR stereo outputs to go into our audio system. Well, when you're doing that, you've got to take some precautions because you don't want to overdrive any of your equipment, your audio system. You don't want to blow it up, that's for sure. So you've got to start carefully and make sure you understand the level of signal that's coming out of the device that you're using or devices so that you get a great sound, a great signal, and don't have any problems with your actual electronics. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that you need to do to prepare to plug a device like the Helix into your audio system and where exactly you want to control things like volume, because that is an important part of the chain to get you a great result with your recording. So let's dive right in. The very first thing that I'm going to do to prepare to hook my Helix into my audio system, which remember is my Motu 1248 Pro Audio interface, is I'm going to turn the channel all the way down. The channels that I'm using for this is mic 1 and mic 2. So let's go ahead and do that now. So whatever my volume level is set at for these two channels, mic 1 and mic 2, I'm going to turn it all the way down. And I'm also going to add the protection of a 20 dB pad, which reduces the input level by 20 decibels. And I think I just turned them off. There we go. I'm turning back on. So I'm going to add that 20 dB pad for that extra level of protection to find out what level of audio is coming in from my Helix. The next thing I'll do is I'll take my two cables that I always have plugged into mic 1 and mic 2, which is an XLR cable, and I'm going to boldly plug them directly into my XLR outs, left and right, from the Helix. The left will be into mic 1, the right will be into mic 2. So we are doing a stereo signal out of the Helix, and there's many reasons for that. If you have a simple setup on the Helix and it's just a amp that you're modeling and no other effects or anything like that, you could just do it with a single mono left channel. But usually you're adding a lot of effects, and many of the presets in the Helix will use your full left-right stereo capability to add dimension. Maybe you're just panning your effects to one side or the other and the guitar sound to the other side. I mean, there's so many reasons that you're going to want that stereo channel, that stereo signal coming out of the Helix and going into your audio system. Now, the other thing I'm going to do on my Helix is I'm actually going to turn the output volume on the Helix all the way up. What's the reason for this? Well, I want the highest signal I can get coming out of my guitar and out of the Helix, and I will control the volume level, the attenuation, through my audio input and through my digital audio workstation. But first and primarily through my audio input, remembering to add whatever level of overhead I want to have. Maybe I'm bringing that in again at -12 to -9 dB. Now, the one thing about that is, if I'm using a Helix, I'm probably doing everything I want to do to that guitar signal as it goes in to my DAW, meaning I'm not going to add any more effects. So I may want to go ahead and get that signal to the -0 to -6 dB level as I'm going into my digital audio workstation. Now, the other aspect of this is that you really don't want to be trying to control volume in 3 or 4 different places. So by maximizing the volume out of your guitar and out of your Helix, in this particular case, you're really doing the final volume controls in your audio system and in your digital audio workstation. So if you are controlling volume in 3 or 4 different places, then you really have a puzzle to work out when something isn't at the volume level that you want. It's best to have fewer variables and control the volume in less places. Now again, just a reminder, in the upcoming segments, I'm going to be talking about my specific hardware that I'm using, my audio interface card, the Motu 1248, my guitar processor, the Helix. This is not a video about how to use those specific pieces of equipment. You may have a different audio interface. You probably have a different guitar processor or other piece of equipment that you'll be feeding your guitar through. So please don't get hung up on the specifics of The Helix, for example, what I'm showing you, there should be some analogous operation that you do on your gear, where you plug your audio interface in, where your volume knob is, that kind of thing. So again, just reminding you, this is about recording your instruments through your gear, and I'm showing you the examples that I have from my gear. Our next step is to check the levels that we get when we play the guitar through the Helix with our 20 dB pad in place and our volumes turned all the way down to 0. And we'll find our starting place from that point. Now what we'll be doing here is we'll be using both the setup program for the 1248, you have an analogous setup program for your audio control system, and I'll be looking at my digital audio workstation at the same time so that I can use the meters to see the levels that we're getting. So let's take a look at that right now. Okay, on the right side of the screen, you see the control software for the 1248. And again, those first two channels are what we're really interested in here, right here. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the digital audio workstation, and of course that's what I'm recording through right now, so you see the meters bouncing around. The two rightmost channels and their meters are what we'll be watching as we play the guitar. So let's do that right now. As you can see, with the current settings, we're peaking at about -12 to -14 decibels. Now remember, I'm already applying every effect that I want to apply through the Helix. I'm not going to do anything else in the digital audio workstation. So I don't need that overhead of 10 decibels or so that I would normally want. I'm only going to need maybe 6 or a little bit less decimals. So I'm going to turn the two channels of volume up by, I'm actually going to go about 8 decibels. And as you can see, we're now between -6 and 0 decibels. Still have enough headroom for the mix, but we've also got a very nice clean sound coming from the Helix through the 1248. And that's the important thing. You know, we don't have a lot of noise or any noise, and we've got the nice sound we wanted from the Helix preset and the guitar itself. Musicianship aside, of course, we're getting what we want from this direct connection of the guitar through the Helix into the 1248 into the digital audio workstation. What we've just done with our guitar, we can also do with our bass guitar. The Helix has bass settings. So I will put my bass through the Helix using one of the many bass settings that the Helix has. And I'll start at roughly the same place as we ended with the guitar, as I think we'll probably need the volume to be a little bit higher, but we'll soon find out. Here again, the rightmost track on the left-hand side, the mixer simulation, is the track we'll be watching for the bass guitar. Okay, I was actually a little off on my call in that particular case, and the bass is a little too hot with that particular setting on the Helix. So I'm going to go back into the interface and we'll back our channel volume down about 6 decibels or so. I'm not positive if I'm on channel 1 or channel 2, so I'll back them both down just in case. Let's take a look. All right, here's our two channels, and we'll go ahead and back this guy down to 2.2. Now notice without the pad how much we'd be overdriving both on the guitar and on the bass. So it's a good thing I have that pad in there to avoid that kind of problem. Okay, let's see what we get this time. Okay, we're getting about that -6 decibel peak range that we want to be in to give ourselves a little overhead for the mix. I don't particularly like that one bass setting that I chose. There are many to choose from with different types of bass sounds and tones, but we're getting the volume level that we want from the bass. Later, you'll see another great example of how Helix can be used in a very different way to get the bass sound that you want. All right, now we're going to have some fun recording drums. Now, we can only record drums directly if we have an electronic drum kit. The only way for you to record your analog kit is with a microphone, or in most cases, several microphones. But with an electronic kit, you have a lot of options and many advantages. Let's talk about some of those advantages. Well, first of all, most electronic kits have literally hundreds of kit types built in, ranging from old style Birch kits to the newest electronic beat machines. So you have a lot of options to choose from. Your drummer has a lot of options to choose from in putting down the sound that you want for the tracks. And that's not just the sound of the regular drum heads, your kick and your snare and your hi-hat. It's all kinds of different electronic sounds that can be made. And these kits have full MIDI capability, so you can have horns, you can have keyboards, all going through your electronic drum set. Everything is configurable within that electronic drum set. And yes, you can spend half your life configuring, but you can also do very practical things with volume levels, tones, and a lot of other options that you have. The brains of these electronic kits are truly amazing at this point and are themselves mini recording studios in many cases. But in my own usage of electronic drums, which I've been using for about 20 years, going back to a Roland V drum set with a TD10 brain, I now use a TD30 KV set with the TD30 brain, one of the latest generations. You've got many, many ways to do your recordings. So let's just review some of those. Well, one is you have MIDI in and out, and that comes in very, very usefully, especially with some of the content you can download in MIDI out there today from people who create that content for that purpose. You can do analog recordings in several different ways. One is simply a stereo out, which allows you to configure the mix the way you want within the drums and then output that to a stereo pair to your digital audio workstation. But you also have 8 separate direct outs from the TD30 that literally allow you to take each component of your kit, your kick, your snare, your hi-hat, your crash cymbals, everything out to a separate channel. So you can actually have a separate track in your recording and do a lot in post-production with that. And then finally, you have USB out, which is yet another way to get your audio signal into your digital audio workstation, into a stereo track. So you have so many options. Now, the one drawback of electronic kits is that drummers prefer to play on real drums. No question about that. However, what I have found is that drummers very quickly get comfortable with the Roland kits, and I'm sure many other kits out there that are electronic, because they have real drum heads and are comfortable to play in that way, even if the cymbals are simulated cymbals. I have yet to have a drummer come in and not be able to produce a good track or refuse to produce a good track because I have an electronic kit. So we're going to do some recording, and I'm going to combine a couple of these methods in a single recording so that you can see some of the flexibility. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is how are we going to connect our TD30 electronic drum kit to the audio inputs for my digital audio workstation, which again, as always, is my Motu 1248. In your case, maybe something very different. Let's take a look. What we're looking at here is some diagrams out of the manuals for the TD30 and the Motu 1248. On the left-hand side is a split screen shot of the back panel of your TD30 with all of the interfaces that are built into it. And on the right is the back panel of the 1248 with the jacks and options that you have on that device. So let's first start at the top left. And what we're looking at here again is the back of the TD30. And what's highlighted here is the 8 direct outs that you have with the TD30 to take each individual element of the kit out to a separate channel. And we're going to record that way here in just a few minutes. So this is really nice to be able to do this. It gives you separate control of each of those devices, which, by the way, on the TD30, each drum head not only produces its direct sound that you would expect, but you have things like rim shots that will produce other sounds depending on how you configure the kit. So you might have a cowbell on a rim shot. You know, you always need more cowbell, right? Now, secondly, we also have the master outputs, which is the left-right stereo pair that I mentioned that you can output via analog. And these are very handy, and when we record, we will actually record both. We will record the master outs and at the same time the 8 separate channels. Now, let's take a look. So we're going to take cables from these direct outs and the master outs, and we're going to plug them in to the 1248. And I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this better. Here are my 4 mic inputs. These are the analog inputs. Then we're going to take those 8 analog inputs and bring them right in here. Now, these pairs are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I didn't point out earlier, but in this case, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the top row, and then 5, 6, 7, 8 on the bottom row. So they're not going to map exactly, but we're going to take 1 to 1, 2 to 2, etc. So that's pretty straightforward. Now I'm pointing out in the lower left-hand corner here that you've got this USB interface right here, and that allows us another way to get the signals from the Roland into the 1248 and then into our digital audio workstation. So this is a picture of my TD30 and the back of it here. So this is a picture of the back of my TD30, and I've connected 8 separate analog cables into that section that I pointed out in the previous images and plugged those into the back of the 1248. I happen to have an 8-wire cable that I could use for this purpose, and that made it very, very handy in setting that up and plugging it in. So that's how we're connected, and now we're ready to do our setup on the 1248 and actually record in our digital audio workstation. Now, as always, we will configure the 1248 using its web-based software for doing so and set the levels of input that we want on each of those 8 separate tracks, 8 separate inputs that are now coming in from the TD30. Here we are in the 1248's web-based setup program, and these are the 8 inputs that we're now working with. And as you can see, I've set every one of them to a 0 dB gain. So I'm neither reducing nor increasing the level of input from the drum kit. Now on the drum kit, I'm getting full output from the directs. So we'll see how this translates as we get into the digital audio workstation. Here we are in a digital performer project that I set up for recording the drums. And I'll isolate on those tracks that we're interested in for that purpose. All right, the way that we're actually going to be recording this is I'm going to be playing some MIDI through to the TD30. And the only MIDI I'm interested in here is this track right here, which is the drums. And that's easier than me trying to go in and play the drums and record something useful for this purpose. So I've set up 8 separate mono audio tracks to record the 8 separate direct outs. And I've labeled them just as they were when we looked at the outputs on the back of the TD30. So we've got our kick, we've got our snare, we've got our hi-hat, we've got our ride, and our 2 toms and our 2 crashes here, all on separate tracks. And you can see that those are record enabled. Now I've also got the stereo output, left, right, coming out of the TD30 as we talked about. However, I'm doing it slightly differently. Rather than using the analogs, I decided I'll go ahead and use the USB interface, which is denoted here as the TD30. And you can see how that works as well. So we've got everything pretty much ready to go here. I'm going to go ahead and play enable these tracks so that you'll hear as we record. And we'll give that a shot. As we record, we'll look at a couple of different views. This is the mixer view, and the first 8 tracks are the direct outs from the TD30, and this last track over here is that stereo out. Okay, let's go ahead and play back some of what we recorded. Before I do, let me just point out some things. The first 8 tracks, again, are the separate direct outs from the TD30. You notice that I panned left and right, the crash cymbals, as well as the toms. So one of the things that you can do, both in your recording and in post, is you can control where things are coming out spatially, and many, many other aspects as well. So here's the tracks as we recorded them. Now I'm only playing back the direct outs right now. We'll play back the stereo in just a moment. You can see from a level standpoint that we're right where we want to be, especially with the kick and the snare. And one of the nice things we can do, because all the tracks are separately recorded, we can go ahead and pump up the snare if we want to, or the kick in this case, or reduce, say, the snare. So you really got lots of control because of the way we've recorded it with the direct outs. There are many, many other aspects that you can control, of course. I can compress the kick if I want to. I can do those types of effects and through add-ons in my DAW. So lots of flexibility that you have there. Now let's do a little A/B between the directs and the stereo track that we recorded. So here are the directs. And let's switch over to the stereo. You'll notice that the stereo is much more full and mixed sounding because directs are dry, essentially. So with the direct outs, we are going to have the ability, but also the need, to create the mix that we want for the drums, add the effects that we want, and in many cases, you may not really need that, so you just want to use the stereo out. But sometimes you want that precise control and the ability to create your own sound. And you'll notice here again that we have just the level of sound that we want out of the stereo mix. And again, we don't need that overhead because we're going to use something that's already been mixed with that stereo out. I'll give you the playback of what we recorded one more time with my microphone off because my microphone is picking up some ambient noise from the room here, computers and such, so that you can see that we really did get a very high quality recording with this direct method. In post-production, you have so many advantages and new capabilities because you've recorded 8 separate tracks on your drums rather than just a stereo track, and it really opens new vistas in your post-production capabilities. But whether you use the stereo track, which is already highly produced and ready to go, or do your own production on separate tracks, you're going to find a lot of advantages in using electronic drums and direct recording methods. For our final segment of part 5 of our basic recording series, we're going to record a small 3-piece band simultaneously with the tools that we have talked about. We're adding a keyboard, which actually is going to be recorded via the analog outputs of the keyboard. The keyboard has many options, just like the TD30 drum set has. But we'll be using 3 different audio interfaces simultaneously into our digital audio workstation, which, may I say, is a very nice capability of Digital Performer and the Motu audio system. The drums will be connected via USB interface. The keyboards will be connected via the analog interface, left, right, out, into my Motu 828X, which is a different audio input than the 1248. The bass guitar will be connected through the Helix floor model in the manner that we discussed earlier in part 5, directly into the mic 1 interface of the 1248. Then a guitar part will be added after the group recording, and that will be recorded via the instrument interface of the 1248. But the simultaneous recording of the group itself will be done through 3 separate audio interfaces at the same time. Pretty cool. Now, the guitar part that's added on is adding a new component. I'm not using the Helix floor model. I'm using the Helix plugin from Line 6 directly into my digital audio workstation. So as I mentioned, the guitar will be connected through the instrument interface of the 1248 directly into the digital audio workstation and into the Line 6 plugin that simulates exactly the Helix. So let's take a look at that real quick. So here I am in the digital audio workstation, and this plugin on the guitar track is a simulation of the Helix. And so you've got their software capability to do the same things with the digital audio workstation plugin that you can do with the floor model of the Helix. I'm even using my favorite preset, the Dark Uncle Floyd preset, for this particular recording. So, 3 separate audio interfaces, 4 separate recording techniques. 3 of them are simultaneous, the bass, the keyboard, and the drums, with the guitar part added in. Let's take a look.
Okay. Are you guys ready?
We are ready. Best for last. Hopefully.
Okay. Hopefully it's good.
Special thanks to my cousin Kyla and her friend Stuart, who are tremendous musicians. And basically, Kyla learned 12-bar blues and played this part in the same half hour. That's how good she is. So thanks to both of them. This is the end of part 5 of our series, Basic Recording. Please join us for part 6 and beyond as we continue to explore the world of basic digital recording.